So thanks for everybody who came to see us talk about Magento security. I'm Max Chadwick. I work at Something Digital. I am a technical lead there, and I work on our strategic engagement group. So we're the team that handles the ongoing maintenance and development work for our clients' websites. Part of that is obviously security as well. So I have experience with client security sites on Magento in production. I'll be moderating the panel, joined by a team of experts here, I would say, starting out with Willem de Groot out of the Netherlands. He created Mage Report, which is a tool you may know about, may have used before, a useful tool for scanning a Magento website for vulnerabilities. He has since then gone on and started a security company called Sansec, which provides a more sophisticated security scan tool, as well as services around that. He has told me that his mission is to secure every Magento store in the world. Also joined by Piotr Kaminski, former employee at Magento. He was a product manager there and worked very much so on the security side of things. He was involved with the security patch release process, the bug bounty, incident response. This was both application security as well as cloud security. And finally, joined by Talesh Seeparsan. Talesh founded Cerberus Watchdog, which is a company that he created. And more importantly, he is a very active member of the Magento community in all aspects of security, in terms of auditing, advocacy, education, and incident response. Without further ado, we'll get started on some questions. I'm going to direct the first question to Willem. So Willem, you see a lot of security incidents in your day. What are the most common types of attacks you see happening against Magento stores?
We detect about 1,000 hacked Magento stores per month, and we do full forensic investigations on about a dozen of them per month. So we have pretty good visibility in the latest methods that are being used. However, number one by far, still the most common attack vector is brute force password guessing still. People still use not very strong passwords, so please use randomized passwords, 10 characters minimum, etc., etc. Second most common attack vector is getting access to third-party components. So most stores have probably 20 to 40 extensions installed, and those usually are install and forget, but many of them contain vulnerabilities, and you should really stay up to date with all of them. It's not only Magento specific extensions, but also things like WordPress that are often installed on the same account and then get hacked, and then they use that WordPress blog to get access to your Magento store and then steal all the data as well. It's also database control panels, accounting software, etc. So you need to stay up to date on all of these components, and it's a pretty big task, but yeah, you have to do it or isolate all these components into their own accounting accounts. Third one is SQL injections, quite a popular one, but still happening today. And what people actually do is they run automated scanners against custom codes. So actually they will just probe all of your forms and see if they can inject a piece of SQL code in any of them. So if you have custom code, custom extensions developed for your store and they have database interaction, you should really ensure that all of them validate user input. Last popular method is an emerging one, and we see more often that people are targeting store staff, so they actually send phishing mails or malware directly to store employees, and once they have control of admin PCs, then they can intercept sessions or passwords and then gain access to the store as well. So yeah, it's a hard problem. It's not about technology mostly. It's also about people, right? So you need to train your staff to not click any links that are too good to be true, I guess. Yeah, and I think those 4 categories, there are many more of them, but those 4 are probably account for 95% of all hacks that we see out there.
Interesting. The next question is for Piotr, and I think that segues nice now that Willem has outlined the type of attack scenarios that merchants should be worried about. Piotr, what would you suggest that site owners should do to prepare for a hacker attempting to compromise their site?
So let's start from an actual attack and work backwards from it. So first of all, finding out that someone broke into your store is often quite not easy. Sometimes the attackers stay for weeks or months before they are discovered. In e-commerce case, it usually goes like that. Cards are stolen, then used for fraud. Payment providers and card companies have algorithms that identify the common point of purchase for those cards, the place where they most probably got stolen. And if this was your store, they will reach out and notify you. In most cases, they can find it. Now, when you discover a successful attack or you're notified about it, it's, from what I've seen, it's like all hands on deck and panic. So the most critical thing to have is to have a plan created before you discover something bad happening. Such a plan is typically called a business continuity plan or disaster recovery plan. There are some differences, but even the smallest business should have one. And there is a good starting point template created by Talesh. I think Talesh can maybe put a link to it in the chat. The most important thing is to identify the owners and decision makers and what kind of decisions they can take. So for example, if your store is compromised and you need to take the store offline for some time, who can decide on that? Like, is it the CEO or is it the security guy? Who will be the designated person to discuss next steps with the payment provider? Who is the legal contact, technical contact? Who can help with site cleanup? Quite often, the vendor that you use for the site is not really up to speed on security, and you will need someone else to do the site cleanup and investigation and fixing. So you need to know who to use, have some contacts ready. Nothing really special, but when things are on fire, you need all this information to be clear for everyone. And then it really depends on many factors. You will need to work with your legal contact to understand what kind of obligations you have to inform customers and regulators. This needs to be also part of the plan. If it's not clear how hackers got in, you will need to hire someone to investigate the site and clean up and protect the site. It's a whole separate topic. But again, the plan, what to do, how to do, who decides, is the most important thing you can do to prepare for someone breaking into your site.
Okay. This is a bit of a sidebar, but when you mentioned bringing the site offline, I'm just wondering, what is the best practice around that decision? I mean, I've heard arguments that if you take an action like that, you may tip off whoever's in your system that you're aware of it, and then you're a step behind them already. I don't know if anybody has thoughts about that.
I'd hazard a question. Does it matter to you if they're tipped off or not? Isn't your domain of importance your own store? Like, if as a merchant, who cares about the hackers? It's important that you keep your store up and running. They'll always be there in the background. It doesn't matter if you tip them off or not. It's important that you secure your customers and you secure your business.
I agree with that. Most of the time, the hackers will be in a country that it's really hard to prosecute them. So, there's a very little chance of actually, harming an investigation that would result in some something done to those hackers. So you need to protect your store, and you need to take the decision that's best for your store. If you know exactly what happened, like, simple JavaScript injection in a known place, you know what to do, you know how to clean it up, you know which account they used to go, like, you can clean it up pretty quickly and maybe not take the store offline. But if they are all over the place, if they are on the server, if they might be taking other customer data or accessing other systems, I would probably take the store offline to figure it out and have someone like do a real investigation.
Cool. Sorry, I was just laughing at the chat. All right, so the next question is for Talesh. I mean, we talked about what the merchant can do to prepare. Security is it everybody's responsibility? There's different answers to that, but if you're a development team, you're writing code that could potentially have security vulnerabilities that could be the source. If Willem's talking about scanners that are detecting SQL injection and things like that, it could potentially find those types of things. So what can someone do? Either a tech lead with a team of developers or whatever it is, to get the development team to begin taking, or a store owner who's worried about security and wants their entire development team to take this more seriously. What would you recommend that a person in that position do to get a team to start taking security more seriously?
Yeah, leading off of what Piotr just said, to have all that preparation in place before the uneventual, the opportunity for somebody to attack you, you need to lay a lot of foundation down, and it's not difficult. A lot of merchants and or teams think securing your site is a purely technical domain, as in VPNs and scanners and using the latest firewalls and whatnot. But it goes deeper than that. The stores that I've seen that have defended themselves against hackers for the longest without a breach, and who have had the most successful defenses up, have inculcated a culture of security within their teams. And it goes all the way from the beginning planning of a project, where if you're an agency and you're quoting a job, or if you're a merchant and you're trying to plan a build, you set aside a little bit of time to secure your systems. Piotr may have a little bit of numbers regarding what sort of percentage was recommended from Magento in the past, but having that culture of setting aside some time, making it a process, that goes a much longer way than saying, we're just going to grab the best firewall, or we're gonna to install the best VPN out there. It doesn't make sense if you have the best technology if you don't have the process to use it effectively. And I think in most circumstances, merchants and or agencies don't pay attention to that part of security. Inculcating a culture of security and building out the processes needed. It's not difficult to have a recurring task on, say, your lead developers Jira bug ticket system, saying, okay, on Monday morning, let's review the logs for the live site, see if there's any sort of attacks. This is a short process, but it goes a long way to keeping an eye on security of a live site. Or saying, look, when we have something like Jenkins running, let's run either the Magento security scanner or any sort of antivirus system, just to make sure that our code that's going out, well, okay, not the Magento security scanner on Jenkins, but let's say you want to run PHP CS. There are tools on GitHub that will give you rules for PHP CS for Magento. So having the culture to think about these things and implementing them as processes in the development of your site goes a significantly longer way towards defending your site compared to, trying to play catch up when something actually does happen. And unfortunately, something does happen is fairly general. And when I say something, I mean credit cards get hijacked.
Yeah. So, Willem, next question is for you. I mean, you outlined the different types of attacks that are most common. I don't know if it's been clearly stated so far, but usually the objective of the attacker, once they've gotten in, is to steal credit cards. Is usually their main objective. And this has been happening for a long time. Since 2015, we have record of these type of attacks, usually using the JavaScript skimmers. So given that 2015 is 5 years ago, why, in your opinion, is this something we're still seeing happening in 2020?
Yeah, I think Talesh is absolutely right by saying that it's about people and processes. And basically it's a cat and mouse game, right? It's a big challenge, and people keep coming up with clever things to gain access and to defend stores. But as long as as code is written, there will be bugs found, and as long as credit cards can be sold for a handsome profit, then it will be worth to steal them. And there's been a lot of technological solutions, but the weak part eventually is I guess, the people connection in all of this. For example, a lot of stores have moved their payment pages to externally hosted pages, right, to become PCI compliant. Now, what we saw then was whenever a store got hacked that had externally hosted payment pages, was that hackers will just inject a fake payment page before the customer gets redirected to the real payment page. So he will effectively enter his credit card twice. And that's a very hard thing. So the root cause here is that you should not allow anyone to be able to access your store and inject anything in the whole flow. And this situation, it will be a challenge for probably a couple more years. I think the one big trend that will solve this is that banks are moving towards forcing their customers to use two-factor authentication. But it's a very slow process. In Europe, it's begun, and even in the US, there are some banks that are moving towards two-factor, but it's very slow. So it will take a couple more years, and even then, probably new attack vectors will come up. But it's interesting.
So that's like, if you tried to use the credit card, you'd get like a text message or whatever it is, saying, here's your PIN, type in the PIN before you can use the credit card. So that basically, even if the credit card gets stolen, it's not, the value is greatly decreased because they can't practically use it for fraud.
It's very hard to intercept the second factor. And in Europe, this has been obligated by the European Commission, but not every country has implemented it yet. But in the US, it's not, so it's still a problem.
It seems like the card providers would have a strong incentive to push in that direction. I mean, aren't they the ones that are on the hook ultimately, generally, when the card is used fraudulently and the customer reports it? The end user whose card was stolen reports it to the credit card company.
So the issuing banks, they have a strong incentive to implement two-factor, but the merchants, they don't want it because they fear conversion loss.
Yeah, that makes sense. Talesh, another question for you. Willem had outlined some of the most common attack vectors that are hitting Magento merchants. Another one that we've heard about before is supply chain attacks. We've seen NPM modules and things like that that are involved in this. So can you walk us through supply chain attacks, what they are, and what, if you're running the website, what you should, how you could try to protect yourself against that type of attack?
Yeah, unfortunately, the term supply chain does get confused because merchants have a separate supply chain. If, let's say, they're a retailer or they're a manufacturer, they have a supply chain where they purchase the raw materials that go into their system. So when you say supply chain attacks, a lot of times what I find is merchants are confused. They're like, what do you mean supply chain attacks? supply chain doesn't only apply to the raw materials a merchant uses to build the product that they eventually sell, but also, as you mentioned, the NPM scripts or whatever external services and software you use on your e-commerce site to have a more profitable site, or to have, in some cases, a functional site. That's your supply chain. And while you could take all the information shared here today and build the most secure Magento site, you still rely on these external services, which in many cases are included as JavaScript on your customer's browser, to be secure, to protect your customer, because JavaScript running on a customer browser has a lot of permissions. So that's what supply chain attacks are. If one of those external services get breached, the attackers breaching an external service has full control of your customer's checkout process and could use that external services to start siphoning credit cards off your site. Now, it's obviously a conundrum. You can't go to every single one of your suppliers, in this case software suppliers, and say, okay, we need you to be really secure because we're really secure and we need you to make all these changes. Many times it's an impossible task. So what you need to do is either have some way of mitigating these sort of this vector of attack, or there are a couple very good technical developments. Someone had mentioned CSP, which is a browser level restriction on what sorts of JavaScript could be included in your checkout page. So you have control of which sites are allowed to inject JavaScript into your system. So you have control of who in your supply chain is supplying code to you. And the other development on the browser side is called sub-resource integrity, which is SRI. They work hand in hand, and sub-resource integrity, along with CSP, make sure, what sub-resource integrity does is it hashes the JavaScript that comes in and says that only this hash of JavaScript that's coming in from this external vendor should be able to run on our site. So these two browser-based, and it's in the vast majority of browsers right now, and yeah, it's in vast majority of browsers right now. These two browser-based defenses allow you to define what you can get from a supplier on the software side and prevent, any sort of problem on their end coming into your site. Mind you, there are still open questions about CSP rules on Magento 2. I can't help with those because I'm not in the loop on the roadmap for those. But that's the defense that the industry has created to defend against supply chain attacks, and it's becoming a little bit of a nefarious way to get into stores. And I think we'll get to a point where it's not a concern as it used to be.
Okay. All right, we have a few more minutes here. I have one more question that I'm going to put out, and I don't know if we're able to go over it. I feel like we've closed the loop on all the questions in the chat here. But the last question is to Piotr, and I think it kind of wraps up, everything we've talked about so far. So imagine someone is in the position where they're just starting out with it. What are the kind of the key takeaways in terms of what they need to know? I think we've mentioned a few things here, but I'm not sure if there's anything else to add. And what type of decisions will they need to make when they're just getting started on this project?
Yeah, so I'll try to talk quickly on that. So let's split the whole starting a project into 3 phases: secure implementation, maintenance, and responsibility if something goes wrong. With this breakdown, let's start with the implementation phase. So in the implementation phase, custom code is created that might have security vulnerabilities. So you need to discuss with your implementation vendor how to ensure those vulnerabilities are minimized, what tools and techniques they use to check their code. Static and dynamic scanning should be a standard. If you really want, you might consider hiring a third-party company to do a pen test of the code, or require this from your vendor. But be prepared that you will raise the cost of the project. A typical pen test engagement is around $50,000. In addition to custom code, there might be some extensions from third-party companies. It's best to limit the number of extensions and the number of vendors of those extensions. This will help both with compatibility and make it easier to control security and patching. You should check with the extension vendor what's their patching and security process, and decide who should be notified, you or the implementation vendor, about updates in the extension. If possible, make the extension part of the pen test as well. Also, make sure when the project is launched on the latest version with all the extensions and libraries updated. I've seen in the past many projects that took quite a long time to put together, being launched on a version that's already insecure. This is just not acceptable. Now, when the project is in production, be aware that there will be security patches released by Magento or extension vendors or operating system vendors. There's quite a lot of that. Magento typically releases 4 patches a year, but if there's a major issue, they will release an additional hotfix. Make sure you know who and when will do the patching and how it will be paid. The most successful approach I've seen is when the implementation vendor has a retainer contract to do patching and other work. So there's no separate purchasing process for each patching. It's much quicker. Make sure the contract also specifies the timeline for fixing. The PCI standard requires 30 days for critical security patches, but given that exploits appear quite often in hours or days after release of a patch, you will want to have your site patched quicker than that. And in addition to code maintenance, ensure there's someone responsible for configuration maintenance. So reviewing the admin actions log if you have Magento Enterprise Edition or Magento Commerce. Remove unused admin accounts. Revoke access to terminated employees' accounts. However, even with the best implementation and maintenance, something might go wrong. And it might be, as Willem said, one of your employees used the same password as for another service that was compromised, like, I don't know, his Netflix account. And or extension you used had a major vulnerability that was not patched in time. As I mentioned in my previous answer, it's critical to know who owns what, who will investigate the issue, who will clean up the site, who will fix the problem itself. And as I also said, quite often the implementation vendors lack the experience to deal with incident response, and you might need to use a specialized vendor. That's quite a lot of things you need to think about, but unfortunately, security is a problem affecting all stores, regardless of technology. This is not a Magento-specific issue. And unfortunately, also, it is getting worse because criminals see how effective it is for them to do crime in a digital world.
All right, cool. I think we're pretty much at time. I feel like we closed the loop on all the questions in the chat. If anybody has any final questions, take them in. We might be able to field a question or two. Otherwise, I think we'll close it out here.
Dan Wallace said Magento v3 is a reCAPTCHA v3, not Magento v3. And prepaid virtual credit cards, I don't use them personally, but I think they're a good idea. It still bears to see the long-term effects of using prepaid and virtual credit cards on sites. It's a great approach. Yeah. I'm giving it a little bit more time.
Just to add to that answer, they might be interesting, but I don't see customers switching to them. There's nothing for them in it. Like from a customer perspective, stolen cards is usually not a big issue. They are easily replaced. You get refunded for all transactions. So the problem of stolen cards is mostly from the business owner perspective, not the customer perspective.
If anything, it'll be more difficult for a business owner to track, or for Visa/MasterCard to say, hey, we think your store is compromised because we're tracking all of these stolen cards that's being reused onto your store, because there's less, if it's widespread enough. But apart from that, I'd say give it a little bit more time. Unless you're significantly concerned, well, give it a try.
Just to clarify on my comment about CSP support and what I said properly supporting CSP in Magento is like Magento 3. There's a lot of work that needs to be done for you to actually be able to use CSP and feel like it's providing some security value. And I have a blog post about this, but inline scripts is kind of the first obvious thing. If you can't prevent inline scripts, then if somebody compromises your site, then they can instead of hosting their malicious JavaScript offsite, they can just put it in an inline script tag, and it won't get blocked because Magento is not currently able to block inline scripts because it relies so heavily on them. But there's also Magento also uses unsafe eval, which is required by a number of the libraries that Magento uses, notably Knockout.js can't run without unsafe eval, and there are bypasses to CSP when you use unsafe eval that doesn't even require you to inject JavaScript into the page. You can inject HTML and put your script into a data attribute. And when you use that library, it will parse that HTML and it will execute scripts based on it. So CSP obviously can't prevent an HTML injection. It was designed to do against that. So you also have to get rid of unsafe eval. And then there's the whole whitelist versus strict dynamic thing. So Magento is currently using a whitelist-based CSP approach, which Google has publicly said is basically Google, who biggest tech company in the world, has said this whitelist approach is not viable for any actual production usage based on their experience with it, because you have to actually whitelist domains that a hacker could take advantage of just by injecting a script that's at that domain. So, like, for example, they have JSON-P callbacks where you can just put a reference to a script and then put a callback script to execute in a URL parameter to that script. And so that they've said that whitelisting doesn't really work. You have to use strict dynamic, and Magento's not currently doing that either. So there's kind of a lot of things, and they're not just minor changes. They're like big architectural changes to the platform to make it so that you can, especially getting rid of inline scripts and getting rid of the need to use unsafe eval, that it almost is probably like, from a practical standpoint, if you wanted to do that, you'd kind of be rebuilding at least the front end of your site. So that's why I said V3 would be proper CSP support. Okay. All right. So there's a slide up here. I don't know if we can make it full screen or if it's if everybody's just seeing that small little box, but it has everybody's contact information. Diego, I don't know if there's a way to make that into like full screen if anybody wants to reach out to anybody on this panel. But I think we're good for today. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. For your great work and blogs. Keep them coming.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone. So now let's go for the networking session. maybe if you want, I can share your details or your on my presentation you send me. It's over here. Or?
The slide I sent has headshots, and then below it, it has everybody's email address and Twitter handle.
Okay.
Yep.
So just click twice here and you have the details.
Okay, thanks. Well, have a great conference.
Yep.
Thank you, guys.
Take care, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.